She taught the galaxy to fear humanity. The Empire ignored her, then came the ashes. In the infinite darkness of the Dark Rim, where dying stars cast their final light across the galactic frontier, a fleet of impossible diversity hung suspended in the void. Ships of crystalline beauty sailed alongside vessels of living metal, their forms as varied as the species that commanded them. The alliance of free worlds had gathered here to face an enemy that had never known defeat. But among the magnificent warships of the Valari, the towering dreadnoughts of the Karathi, and the elegant cruisers of the Zalani Confederacy, 37 small vessels seemed almost forgotten. Human ships, barely worthy of notice. Their hulls bore scars of hasty construction, their weapons appeared primitive, and their formation looked chaotic compared to the precise military arrangements of their allies. Captain Elise Morgan stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Defiant Star, studying tactical displays with eyes that had seen too much war. At 34, she carried herself with the measured precision of someone who understood that survival was a skill requiring constant practice. The War Council chamber aboard the Valari flagship Eternal Wisdom buzzed with tension. Representatives from 14 species had gathered around a holographic star map showing the relentless advance of the Tharnix Empire. Red markers spread like infection across previously neutral worlds, each representing billions of lives under Imperial control. Ambassador Yalrex of the Valari floated in their crystalline environmental suit, their ancient form barely visible through layers of protective energy fields. Their voice carried the weight of centuries. The Tharnix fleet approaches with 800 vessels. Our combined forces number 637. General Vroon of the Karathi, his massive frame encased in ceremonial battle armor, gestured dismissively toward the human section. 600 if we discount the humans. 37 cargo haulers do not constitute a military contribution. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled delegates. The Zalani representative added softly, "Their species has barely achieved interstellar travel. They lack energy shields, plasma weaponry, or basic gravitational manipulation technology." Captain Morgan sat in silence at the far end of the conference table, her simple military uniform a stark contrast to the elaborate ceremonial dress of the other species. Admiral Dorian Slade shifted uncomfortably as diplomatic disapproval settled around them, like radiation from a dying star. "Captain Morgan," Ambassador Yalrex addressed her directly, "perhaps your vessels would be better suited for evacuation duties. The approaching battle will require technologies your species has not yet developed." Morgan's response came without hesitation, her voice carrying an odd certainty that seemed to disturb the more experienced military minds present. "We're not here to evacuate, Ambassador. We're here to fight." The Karathi general's laugh echoed through the chamber like metal striking stone. "Fight your largest vessel masses less than our smallest escort. Your weapons fire solid projectiles. You have no experience with space combat beyond your own system." "That's correct," Morgan acknowledged, her pale eyes meeting each delegate in turn. "We also have no experience with losing wars." The statement hung in the air like a challenge none of them quite understood. Ambassador Yalrex studied the human captain with growing unease. Something about this small, quiet woman from an unremarkable world triggered ancient instincts that whispered of predators walking among prey. The briefing continued with tactical assessments. The Tharnix Empire's approach followed standard doctrine, overwhelming force, applied with mechanical precision. Their ships were larger, more heavily armed, and protected by shield technology that had proven impervious to conventional weapons. Emperor Vorak's forces had conquered 43 worlds using these exact tactics. When assignments were distributed, the human fleet received escort duty for the medical ships. Alliance Command viewed this as keeping the inexperienced humans away from primary battle while allowing them to participate in their own defense. Captain Morgan accepted the assignment without comment, but Admiral Slade noticed the slight smile that touched the corners of her mouth. It was the expression of someone who had just been given exactly what they wanted. The human quarters aboard Eternal Wisdom felt cramped compared to the soaring architecture designed for species that could manipulate gravity or exist in multiple dimensions. Captain Morgan sat alone reviewing intelligence reports that painted a grim picture of Tharnix capabilities. Outside her window, the Alliance fleet moved through final preparations with choreographed beauty. Valari ships sang to each other through harmonic frequencies that could shatter asteroid belts, while Korathi dreadnoughts bristled with weapons that could crack planetary crusts. The Zalani vessels danced through space like living things, their organic hulls shifting to optimize for combat. And ignored by them all, the human ships maintained their seemingly random formations, their crude nuclear drives producing energy signatures so weak they barely registered on Alliance sensors. Admiral Slade entered carrying data tablets. The tactical assessments are in. The Alliance command estimates a 60% probability of successful defense. And our survival chances, Morgan asked without looking up. They didn't include us in their calculations. Morgan finally raised her eyes, and Slade was struck by how much older they seemed than her years. She had lost everything in the Mars crisis 7 years ago: family, friends, the comfortable certainty that humanity's expansion into space would be peaceful. That loss had transformed her from a military historian into something much more dangerous, a student of war who understood that survival sometimes required embracing the unthinkable. "They're making a mistake," she said quietly. "The Tharnics or the Alliance? Both." Through communication channels, they could hear fragments of conversation from other species. The Korathi spoke of honor and glorious battle. The Zalani discussed tactical harmony and preservation of life. The Valari debated philosophical implications of resistance versus surrender. None of them spoke of winning through any means necessary. In the human fleet, Captain Morgan's subordinates received orders that would have horrified their allies. The Defiant Star's armaments were stripped of safety protocols. Navigation systems were modified to calculate intercept courses at velocities that would be lethal to the ships themselves. Most disturbing of all, each vessel was equipped with deadman switches that would detonate their fusion reactors if triggered. Captain Chen of the Salvation questioned the modifications during a private communication. "Captain, these changes effectively turn our ships into guided missiles. We're preparing for suicide runs." Morgan's response carried the cold certainty of someone who had already accepted the price of victory. "Captain Chen, the galaxy is about to learn something about human warfare that no other species has ever needed to understand. We're the only race that developed the concept of mutually assured destruction and then built our entire military doctrine around it. The concept required translation for Alliance computers. When other species finally understood what mutually assured destruction meant, the deliberate development of weapons so terrible that their use would guarantee the destroyer's own annihilation, the result was stunned silence. Ambassador Yalrex accessed historical databases about human conflict, searching for context that might explain such seeming madness. What they found left them deeply troubled. Humanity was the only known species that had survived its own discovery of world-ending weapons. Every other civilization had either used such weapons to destroy themselves or abandoned them as too terrible to contemplate. Humans had kept them, perfected them, and built their entire concept of peace on the foundation of promised mutual annihilation. "This is not honor," General Vroon declared when intelligence reports reached Korathi Command. "This is insanity." Perhaps Ambassador Yalrex replied, their ancient voice carrying new undertones of concern. "But it is also why they are still alive." The Tharnics fleet emerged from hyperspace like a plague of metal locusts, their formation perfect, their advance inexorable. 800 vessels moved with mechanical precision toward the Alliance defensive line, their hulls gleaming with the promise of conquest. Emperor Vorak commanded from his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, a vessel so massive it generated its own gravitational field. The Emperor himself was imposing even by Tharnic standards, nearly 3 meters tall, his reptilian features bearing scars from 100 conquered worlds. Alliance vessels. Vorak's transmission reached every ship. "You defend primitive worlds with obsolete technologies. Surrender now, and your species will be permitted to serve the Empire. Resist, and you will share the fate of all who oppose Tharnic's expansion." The Alliance response came from Admiral Kithera of the Valari. "Emperor Vorak, we reject your terms. These worlds are under the protection of the Alliance of Free Worlds. Withdraw, or face the consequences of your aggression." Vorak's laughter was like grinding metal. "I see the same ships, the same weapons, the same tactics that failed to stop us at Corvara Prime. You have learned nothing from your defeats." The Emperor was correct. The Alliance had faced the Tharnics before, and they had lost. But what Vorak failed to notice was the cluster of primitive vessels holding position behind the medical ships. their energy signatures so insignificant they barely registered as military threats. Captain Morgan watched the tactical display as the Tharnix fleet advanced in perfect formation. Their approach was textbook, a central spearhead of heavy assault ships supported by flanking forces of fast attack craft. The strategy had proven unbeatable against conventional opposition. All human vessels, Morgan transmitted on an encrypted channel, initiate silent running protocols. Cut all non-essential systems. Drift toward the nebula's edge on momentum only. To outside observers, it appeared that the human ships were retreating before the battle even began. Alliance commanders shook their heads in disappointment, but not surprise. The Tharnix barely acknowledged the movement. 37 primitive vessels fleeing from superior force was exactly what they expected. The main battle erupted with the fury of colliding stars. Tharnix plasma cannons met Alliance energy shields in brilliant displays of destruction. The space between fleets filled with expanding clouds of vaporized metal and escaping atmosphere. The Alliance fought with courage and skill, but their tactics were predictable. They formed defensive lines, concentrated firepower on priority targets, and attempted to minimize casualties while achieving military objectives. It was civilized warfare conducted by civilized species according to civilized rules. The Tharnix responded with overwhelming force, applied without restraint. They had no interest in minimizing casualties, their own or their enemies. Victory was achieved through superior firepower and willingness to accept any cost necessary to destroy opposition. For 20 minutes, the battle followed familiar patterns. Then, Captain Morgan's voice cut through the chaos on an open channel. "Emperor Vorak!" she said, her tone conversational despite the destruction surrounding them. "You're fighting the wrong war." The Tharnix Emperor's response was immediate and filled with contempt. "A human speaks, return to your cargo haulers primitive. This battle is beyond your comprehension." "Actually," Morgan replied, "I've been studying your tactics for 6 months. You use overwhelming force and direct assault. You accept casualties to achieve objectives. You believe superior technology guarantees victory. It's effective against civilized opponents." Morgan's next transmission came from coordinates that should have been impossible. The human ships had somehow moved from the battle's periphery to positions scattered throughout the Tharnix formation without being detected. "Unfortunately for you, Emperor, we've never been particularly civilized." The Salvation struck first, ramming the Tharnix heavy cruiser Conquest at 60% of light speed. The collision didn't just destroy both ships, it created a fusion explosion that vaporized everything within a 10-kilometer radius. The expanding fireball consumed 2 additional Tharnix vessels and sent debris crashing into others. Before the Emperor could process what had happened, 5 more human ships executed similar attacks. They emerged from sensor shadows accelerated to impossible velocities and transformed themselves into guided nuclear weapons that carved holes through the heart of the Tharnix formation. "Impossible!" General Vroon shouted. "Those ships should have been detected. How did they penetrate our sensor network?" The answer came from Captain Morgan's remaining vessels as they opened fire with weapons that shouldn't have existed. Instead of energy beams or exotic particles, the human ships fired solid projectiles, chunks of refined metal accelerated to significant fractions of light speed by magnetic coils running the length of their hulls. At those velocities, mass became irrelevant. Simple iron slugs struck Tharnix shields with the kinetic energy of nuclear weapons. The Empire's energy barriers, designed to deflect plasma and particle beams, proved useless against solid matter moving at near relativistic speeds. The Tharnix formation began to collapse as ships found themselves under attack from impossible angles by weapons their defenses couldn't stop. The Emperor's perfect formation transformed into chaos as vessels collided trying to avoid human attacks that seemed to anticipate their every movement. Admiral Emperor Vorak demanded, "Explain how 37 primitive vessels are destroying my fleet." The Admiral's response came through static-filled communication. "My lord, they're not fighting like any known species. They're using their own ships as weapons. They're firing projectiles that ignore our shields. They move without being detected and strike without warning. Then adapt, use our numerical superiority." "My lord!" The Admiral's voice carried something the Emperor had never heard before in his force's fear. "I don't think they care about numerical superiority. They're not trying to win a battle, they're trying to kill us all." The distinction was crucial. The Alliance fought to defend their worlds while minimizing losses. The Tharnics fought to conquer while accepting necessary casualties. The humans fought to completely destroy their enemies regardless of the cost to themselves. As the first engagement ended, the Tharnics fleet had lost 47 ships to the human attack. Captain Morgan's force had been reduced to 14 vessels, all damaged, several barely operational. But in the debris field left behind, something new floated among the wreckage pieces of Tharnics technology salvaged by human boarding parties in the chaos of battle. Components that would be studied, reverse-engineered, and improved. Emperor Vorak stared at the tactical display showing the carnage his fleet had suffered. For the first time in his military career, he was facing an enemy that seemed genuinely unconcerned with their own survival. And for the first time in his life, the Emperor of the Tharnics felt something he had never experienced before: uncertainty. 3 days after the first engagement, the Tharnics fleet regrouped at the edge of the Joric Nebula, their formation now bearing gaps where human weapons had carved through their ranks. Emperor Vorak paced the bridge like a caged predator, his scaled features twisted with frustration that bordered on rage. "Explain to me," he growled at his assembled commanders, "how a species that fights with projectile weapons managed to destroy 47 ships of the Imperial Navy." General Varun gestured at the tactical display. "Emperor, their tactics are unlike anything in our databases. They show no regard for self-preservation. Their ships are designed to be expendable. They treated the engagement as if every vessel was a guided missile." "Suicide attacks are not unknown," Admiral Krex interjected. "The Zilani used similar tactics at Helios Prime, but only as a last resort when defeat was certain." "These humans," Vorak said slowly, "used suicide attacks as their primary strategy from the beginning of the engagement. The implications hung in the air like radiation from a poisoned star. The Tharnics military doctrine was built on the assumption that all intelligent species valued self-preservation above tactical objectives. An enemy, willing to trade their own destruction for strategic advantage, broke fundamental assumptions about how wars were fought." "My lord," Admiral Krex continued, "our intelligence indicates the humans have reinforced their position. Sensor readings suggest they've received additional vessels, but the energy signatures are unusual." Emperor Vorak studied the long-range scans with growing concern. The human fleet had indeed grown, but the new ships looked different from the converted cargo haulers that had bloodied his nose 3 days earlier. These vessels were sleeker, more aggressive in design, and their energy output suggested technologies that should have been beyond human capabilities. "How many?" he asked. 63 vessels confirmed, possibly more concealed within the nebula. The Emperor's claws scraped against his throne. The humans had not only replaced their losses, they had nearly doubled their fleet strength in 72 hours. The speed of construction suggested either massive industrial capacity or technologies far more advanced than intelligence had indicated. "Perhaps," General Vrun suggested carefully, "we should request additional forces before the next engagement." The suggestion carried implications that made Vorak's scaled skin crawl. The general was advising caution against an enemy the Empire had dismissed as primitive savages 3 days earlier. "The Empire does not request assistance to deal with cargo haulers," Vorak declared. "We will destroy them completely. Prepare for full engagement." Meanwhile, aboard the Defiant Star, Captain Morgan studied intelligence reports that painted an accurate picture of Tharnics' preparations. Her ship's bridge bustled with activity as crew members installed equipment that had no designation in any military manual, because until 72 hours ago, it hadn't existed. The pieces of Tharnics technology recovered from the first battle had been subjected to analysis that revealed both capabilities and weaknesses. Human engineers working with the desperate efficiency of a species facing extinction had not only reverse-engineered alien systems, but improved them. Captain reported Lieutenant Sarah Chen, "The modifications are complete. All vessels report ready for implementation of Protocol 7. Protocol 7 existed nowhere in Alliance military doctrine. It was a purely human innovation that combined recovered Tharnic shielding technology with human weapons in ways that violated several conventions of civilized warfare." "Thank you, Lieutenant," Morgan replied, then opened a channel to the human fleet. "All ships, this is Defiant Star. Today, we're going to teach the galaxy something about human warfare that they'll remember for 1,000 years. The transmission that followed was not encrypted. Every ship in the Alliance fleet heard Captain Morgan address her commanders with instructions that left the other species' representatives deeply disturbed. "The Tharnics expect us to fight for survival," Morgan continued. "They expect us to minimize casualties and preserve our forces. They expect rational tactics from rational opponents." Her voice carried the cold certainty of someone who had studied humanity's capacity for organized violence with academic thoroughness. They're about to learn why every human military academy teaches courses on something called acceptable losses. The difference between humans and every other species you'll meet is simple. We defined acceptable losses as 100% before we ever left our home planet. The Alliance commanders listening to this transmission felt a collective chill. Ambassador Yalrex, monitoring human communications from Eternal Wisdom, experienced something their ancient race rarely felt: genuine fear. When the Tharnics fleet advanced for the second engagement, they found the human ships arranged in a formation that appeared to violate basic tactical principles. The vessels were spaced too far apart for mutual support, positioned in locations that offered no defensive advantages, and oriented in ways that seemed to ignore the approaching enemy entirely. Emperor Vorak studied the human positions with the satisfaction of a predator observing trapped prey. "They've made themselves easy targets. Concentrate fire on the largest vessels. Show them the price of resistance." The Tharnics opened fire with devastating effect. Plasma cannons and particle beams reached across space to strike human ships that made no effort to evade. Several vessels exploded immediately, their nuclear reactors detonating under the assault. But, as the Tharnics' weapons continued firing, they began to notice something impossible. The human ships that should have been destroyed were still operational. Energy readings showed that Tharnics' weapons were striking their targets, but the damage was not accumulating as expected. Admiral Shatters reported, the sensor officer aboard Eternal Dominion, "The human vessels appear to be using modified versions of our own shield technology." "Impossible," Vorak snapped. "They lack the industrial capacity to replicate Imperial systems." "Nevertheless, my Lord Energy analysis confirms they have somehow integrated capture technology into their defensive arrays." The revelation was disturbing enough, but what happened next transformed concern into horror. The human ships began firing back, not with the projectile weapons of the first engagement, but with energy beams that matched Tharnics' frequencies exactly. "They're using our own weapons against us," Admiral Krex reported, his voice tight with disbelief. The modified human vessels didn't just copy Tharnics' technology, they improved it. Their energy shields were more efficient, their weapons more accurate, their targeting systems faster and more precise than Imperial equivalents. But the true horror came when the Tharnics fleet realized what the human formation actually represented. The seemingly random positioning of human ships created overlapping fields of fire that turned space itself into a killing zone. Any Tharnics vessel that advanced found itself under simultaneous attack from multiple angles, while human ships supported each other with defensive screens that distributed damage across the entire formation. "It's a trap," General Vroon whispered as he watched his fleet being systematically dismantled. The climax came when Captain Morgan's own ship, Defiant Star, broke from the formation and accelerated directly toward the Tharnics flagship. But instead of the suicide run, Emperor Vorak expected, the human vessel opened fire with weapons that shouldn't have existed. The beams that lanced out from Defiant Star were gravity manipulators, devices that could twist space-time itself into a weapon. The technology was Tharnics in origin, but the application was purely human. Eternal Dominion's shields designed to deflect energy and matter proved useless against weapons that altered the fundamental structure of space around them. The flagship's hull began to collapse as localized gravity fields crushed sections of the vessel like empty containers. "Impossible," Vorak breathed as his mighty dreadnought shuddered under impossible forces. "Those weapons require power sources we do not possess ourselves." The truth was even more disturbing. The humans had coupled Tharnics' gravity technology with their own fusion reactors, creating power outputs that exceeded Imperial specifications. As Eternal Dominion's hull began to buckle, Captain Morgan's voice reached the Emperor on an open channel. "Emperor Vorak," she said, her tone conversational, despite the destruction surrounding them. "I want you to understand something about human warfare. We don't fight to win. We fight to make sure our enemies lose. The distinction was subtle but crucial. Winning implied achieving objectives while preserving resources. Making enemies lose meant accepting any cost necessary to ensure their defeat. "You can surrender now," Morgan continued, "or you can discover what humans do to empires that threaten our survival. The choice is yours." For the first time in his long career of conquest, Emperor Vorak found himself facing a decision no Tharnix commander had ever confronted: surrender, or face an enemy that seemed genuinely prepared to destroy themselves, if necessary, to ensure his defeat. The second engagement ended with the Tharnix fleet in full retreat, leaving behind 68 destroyed vessels and an enemy that had somehow transformed from primitive threat to existential nightmare in less than a week. As his remaining ships fled toward Imperial space, Vorak realized that everything he thought he knew about warfare had become obsolete. The humans weren't just fighting to defend their territory, they were fighting to redefine the very concept of what war could become. The Great Council Chamber aboard Eternal Wisdom had never hosted a gathering quite like this one. Representatives from 14 species sat in stunned silence as holographic displays showed the aftermath of the second engagement between Tharnix and human forces. The casualty reports defied comprehension: over 100 Imperial vessels destroyed by a human fleet that had grown from 37 ships to 63 in less than a week. Ambassador Yalrex floated in their crystalline chamber, their ancient form absolutely motionless, as they processed implications that threatened to overturn everything their civilization understood about warfare. When they finally spoke, their harmonious voice carried undertones of something approaching awe. "In 12 decades of diplomatic service," Yalrex began, "I have witnessed the rise and fall of 17 distinct military doctrines. I have observed species master technologies that reshape matter itself, develop weapons that can ignite stars, and create defenses that render entire fleets powerless." The assembly waited in respectful silence. The Volari were known throughout the galaxy as the ultimate observers. Their perspective spanned centuries, and their analysis had prevented countless wars through accurate prediction of outcomes. "I have never," Yalrex continued, "encountered a species that treats technological advancement as a real-time battlefield adaptation. The humans are not using weapons they brought to this conflict. They are using weapons they created from their enemies' remains during the conflict itself." General Vroon shifted in his massive powered armor, the sound like grinding stone. His warrior culture valued strength and honor, but what the humans had demonstrated transcended both concepts in ways that disturbed him profoundly. "Ambassador," he said carefully, "the humans fight without honor. They use trickery and deception. They sacrifice their own vessels as weapons. This is not warfare, it is savagery." Captain Morgan, who had been invited to address the council for the first time since hostilities began, stood to respond. Her simple uniform seemed almost primitive compared to the elaborate ceremonial dress of the other representatives, but her presence commanded attention in ways that had nothing to do with rank or technology. "General Vroon," she said, her voice carrying the patient tone of someone explaining complex concepts to children, "you speak of honor as if war were a sporting event with agreed-upon rules. My species learned long ago that war is not about honor. War is about survival." The Karathi general's massive form leaned forward aggressively. "And what does your species know of war, human? You have barely achieved interstellar travel. Your longest conflict lasted mere decades." Morgan's response carried implications that sent chills through every representative present. "General, my species has been at war continuously for over 5,000 years. We have fought with every weapon we could devise on every type of terrain we could imagine against every form of enemy we could encounter." She activated a holographic display that showed images from human history battles, fought with bronze weapons, medieval sieges, modern mechanized warfare, and finally the nuclear exchanges that had nearly destroyed their own civilization. "We have fought wars of survival, wars of conquest, wars of ideology, and wars of simple territorial expansion. We have developed weapons capable of destroying our own planet multiple times over, and we have used them in anger." The chamber fell absolutely silent. No other known species had ever developed world-ending weapons and then actually employed them in warfare. "Most importantly," Morgan continued, "we survived our own technological adolescence. We learned to control weapons that could annihilate us. And in doing so, We learned something that no other species has ever needed to understand how to make war so terrible that peace becomes the only rational choice. Ambassador Yalrex's voice carried new respect when they responded. Captain Morgan, your species has achieved something we thought impossible. You have weaponized the concept of mutually assured destruction and then chosen to survive it. Exactly, Morgan replied. And now Emperor Vorak is about to discover what happens when a species that has mastered the art of controlled annihilation decides that someone else represents an existential threat. The briefing that followed revolutionized Alliance understanding of human capabilities. What the other species had dismissed as primitive technology was revealed to be something far more dangerous adaptive methodology that could transform any available resource into a weapon. Show them the salvation protocol, Admiral Slade suggested, and Morgan activated another holographic display. The images that appeared left the assembled representatives visibly shaken. The protocol showed human ships retrofitted with captured Tharnix technology, but the modifications went far beyond simple reverse engineering. Human engineers had identified ways to overload alien systems, creating weapons that exceeded their original specifications by factors that should have been impossible. "This is madness," whispered the Zalani representative. "You are pushing technologies beyond their safe operational parameters." "Safe operational parameters," Morgan replied, "are a luxury we abandoned the moment the Tharnix decided to threaten our existence. We are now operating under something we call acceptable risk protocols." "And what level of risk do humans consider acceptable?" asked the delegate from the Korthani hives. Morgan's smile carried implications that would haunt the assembled representatives for years to come. "Any level of risk that results in our enemy's complete destruction." The transformation in how the Alliance viewed humanity was not gradual, it was instant and total. Species that had dismissed humans as primitive cargo haulers now found themselves studying human tactical innovations with a mixture of fascination and horror. The formal ceremony that followed was unprecedented in Alliance history. For the first time ever, a species was granted full military autonomy, not because of superior technology or greater numbers, but because they had demonstrated capabilities that transcended conventional military thinking. Captain Morgan accepted the Alliance Badge of Protection, a crystalline artifact that designated humanity as protectors of Alliance worlds. The irony was not lost on anyone present. The most primitive species in the Alliance had just been recognized as its most dangerous defenders. "Captain Morgan," Ambassador Yalrex said as they presented the badge, "your species has taught us something we thought impossible to learn. You have shown us that true strength lies not in the power to destroy others, but in the wisdom to control the power to destroy yourself." Morgan's response would be quoted by military historians for generations. "Ambassador, with respect, we haven't just learned to control the power to destroy ourselves. We've learned to use that power to make sure nobody else destroys us either." As the ceremony concluded, one fact became clear to every species present: humanity had not joined the Alliance as junior partners seeking protection. They had joined as the predators who would ensure that nothing in the galaxy was ever again powerful enough to threaten the Alliance's survival. The Imperial throne world of Tharnix Prime had not seen preparation for war on this scale in 3 centuries. Across the planet's surface, shipyards worked around the clock to construct vessels for the largest fleet in Imperial history. Emperor Vorak's response to his defeats was characteristically direct. If 800 ships could not defeat the humans, then he would bring 2,000. The Emperor stood in the Supreme Command Center, a crystalline structure that rose from the planet's surface like a metallic mountain. Before him stretched holographic displays showing ship construction, troop movements, and resource allocation on a scale that dwarfed previous Imperial expeditions. "Admiral Krex," Vorak commanded, "report on fleet preparation." "My lord," the Admiral replied, his scaled features bearing the marks of stress. 2,000 vessels are nearly complete. We have incorporated every technological advancement in Imperial archives. Energy shields have been reinforced. Still, weapons have been upgraded. Hull armor has been replaced with composite materials that should resist kinetic impact. And our intelligence on human capabilities? Limited, my lord. Their technology appears to advance in real time during combat. every engagement reveals new weapon systems that did not exist in previous encounters. Emperor Vorak studied tactical analyses that painted a disturbing picture of human adaptation. In less than 2 weeks, humanity had progressed from primitive projectile weapons to modified imperial technology that exceeded original specifications. General Vroon, Vorak continued, what is your assessment of human ground capabilities? The massive Karathi warrior gestured at intelligence reports. Emperor, the humans possess no energy weapons, no gravitational manipulation technology, and no advanced materials beyond basic metallurgy. Their ground forces use chemical explosives and projectile weapons exclusively. Then we will land sufficient troops to overwhelm any terrestrial resistance, Vorak decided. This war ends with the occupation of human worlds. What the Emperor didn't realize was that his intelligence was already obsolete. Even as the Imperial fleet prepared for departure, human engineers were making modifications that would redefine the concept of planetary defense. On Earth, Captain Morgan stood in the Pentagon's Strategic Command Center, surrounded by displays showing preparations that would have horrified every Alliance species simultaneously. The modifications to Earth's defenses were not merely military, they represented a transformation of human civilization itself into a weapon of war. Dr. Chen Morgan addressed the chief scientist of the Earth Defense Force, report on the implementation of the Fortress Protocol. Dr. Sarah Chen activated holographic displays that showed Earth's transformation. Captain, the orbital platforms are complete. We have successfully integrated captured Tharnix technology with our nuclear arsenal to create gravitational weapons capable of crushing ship hulls at range. The displays showed massive installations hidden in Earth's shadow, camouflaged as asteroid mining operations, but actually containing weapons that could alter local gravity fields with surgical precision. More significantly, Dr. Chen continued, we have completed the Deep Strike Protocol. If the Tharnix fleet attempts orbital bombardment, we can respond with kinetic strikes against any target within 50 light-years. Morgan studied the tactical implications with cold calculation. The Deep Strike Protocol represented humanity's ultimate response to existential threat, the ability to reach across interstellar distances and destroy enemy homeworlds through kinetic bombardment. The Tharnix homeworld. Targeted and plotted, Captain. Kinetic penetrators are prepared for launch. Travel time would be approximately 47 hours at 98% light speed. The weapons Dr. Chen described existed nowhere in galactic military doctrine. Kinetic penetrators traveling at near light speed could crack the crust of planets, causing geological devastation that would render worlds uninhabitable for millennia. Admiral Slade. Morgan continued. Status of the fleet modifications. Admiral Slade activated additional displays, showing the human fleet that had grown from 63 vessels to over 200 in 3 weeks. But these were no longer the converted cargo haulers of the early engagements. They were purpose-built instruments of destruction that incorporated technologies stolen from the Tharnix and improved beyond Imperial specifications. All vessels are equipped with adaptive defensive systems, Slade reported. We can now counter every known Imperial weapon. Additionally, each ship carries kinetic penetrators capable of continental destruction. When the Imperial fleet arrived at Earth, they found a solar system that had been transformed into the galaxy's most comprehensive killing zone. Asteroid belts had been converted into kinetic weapon platforms. Gas giants had been mined for materials to construct defensive installations. Even the space between planets was filled with monitoring systems that could track ship movements with precision that made stealth impossible. My lord, Admiral Krex reported as the Imperial fleet took position at the system's edge, the humans have fortified their entire star system. Energy readings suggest weapon platforms throughout the solar system, but the specific configurations are unknown. Emperor Vorak studied long-range scans that showed defensive preparation that exceeded anything in Imperial experience. How many installations? Unknown, my lord. The humans appear to have disguised military platforms as civilian infrastructure. We cannot distinguish between legitimate targets and camouflaged weapons. The Emperor's response demonstrated why the Tharnix had conquered 43 worlds. When faced with uncertainty, he chose overwhelming force. Signal all ships, Vorak commanded. Begin orbital bombardment of the third planet. reduce their homeworld to ash, then eliminate every installation in the system. The Imperial fleet opened fire with every weapon they possessed. 2,000 ships unleashed planetary bombardment that could sterilize continents, reduce cities to vapor, and crack planetary crusts through sheer destructive force. But as the massive energy beams reached toward Earth, something impossible happened. The attacks were absorbed by defensive shields that appeared to draw power from the planet itself. Earth's energy output suggested that the entire world had been converted into a massive power source for defensive systems. Impossible! Vorak roared, as his fleet's most devastating weapons proved completely ineffective against human defenses. Admiral Krex studied sensor readings with growing horror. "My lord, the humans appear to have tapped into their planet's geothermal core. They are using the entire world as a power source for defensive systems that exceed our offensive capabilities. But Earth's response to the Imperial bombardment demonstrated capabilities that transcended defense entirely. The planet's surface erupted with kinetic launches that sent projectiles racing toward the Imperial fleet at velocities that made evasion impossible. These were not energy weapons or exotic particles. They were simple chunks of refined matter accelerated to 98% of light speed by gravitational manipulation technology that had been pushed far beyond safe operational parameters. When the kinetic rounds struck Imperial ships, they didn't just penetrate hulls, they vaporized everything within kilometers of impact. The projectiles carried so much energy that they created temporary fusion reactions that consumed entire vessels in milliseconds. "Retreat," Vorak commanded as he watched his mighty fleet being systematically destroyed. "All ships withdraw to safe distance." But as the Imperial fleet attempted to retreat, they discovered that the humans had prepared for this possibility as well. Space around the solar system filled with kinetic barriers, fields of accelerated matter that could destroy ships attempting to escape. The trap was perfect, comprehensive, and inescapable. The Tharnix Empire's greatest fleet found itself surrounded by weapons that could destroy them completely, while being unable to inflict any meaningful damage on their opponents. Captain Morgan's voice reached Emperor Vorak on a communication channel that somehow penetrated Imperial encryption. "Emperor," she said, her tone carrying the politeness of someone offering a business transaction, "you have two choices. You can surrender your fleet and accept human terms for ending this conflict, or you can discover what happens when a species that has survived its own potential extinction decides that your empire represents an existential threat." The choice was no choice at all. Emperor Vorak, who had never contemplated surrender in a career spanning 2 centuries, found himself facing an enemy that had successfully weaponized the ultimate military advantage, the willingness to accept their own total destruction, if necessary, to ensure their enemy's defeat. For the first time in Imperial history, a Tharnix fleet surrendered without conditions. As human ships moved to accept the surrender of 2,000 Imperial vessels, the galaxy received confirmation of something that would reshape interstellar politics forever. Humanity had not just joined the galactic community as another species seeking their place among the stars. They had arrived as the apex predators who would ensure that no empire would ever again be powerful enough to threaten the survival of any Alliance world. 5 years after the surrender of the Tharnix Imperial fleet, the galaxy bore little resemblance to the collection of independent species that had first encountered humanity on the Dark Rim frontier. The transformation was fundamental, touching every aspect of how civilizations interacted, how conflicts were resolved, and how the very concept of security was understood. Captain Elise Morgan, now bearing the title of Strategic Coordinator for the Alliance Defense Force, stood in the memorial chamber aboard the new flagship Unity's Promise. The chamber was carved from crystalline stone donated by the Valari, its walls bearing the names of every human who had died in the defense of Alliance worlds. "Dr. Chen." Morgan addressed her chief science officer, now bearing the title of Technological Integration Specialist, report on the Galactic War Adaptation Programs. Dr. Sarah Chen activated holographic displays that showed the extent of human influence throughout Alliance space. What the displays revealed would have been unimaginable to the species who had first dismissed humanity as primitive cargo haulers. Strategic Coordinator. Chen began. "We have successfully integrated human tactical doctrine into the military academies of all 14 Alliance species. The Karathi War College now teaches courses on acceptable loss calculations. The Valari Diplomatic Corps studies human conflict resolution methodologies. Even the Zalani have adapted their harmonic defense systems to include kinetic countermeasures. The transformation was unprecedented in galactic history. Rather than imposing their will through conquest, humanity had achieved something far more profound. They had taught other species to think about survival the way humans did. More significantly, Chen continued, the Tharnix integration protocol has exceeded all expectations. Former Imperial worlds have voluntarily adopted Alliance membership, and Tharnix military academies now train their officers in human tactical innovation. Morgan studied reports that documented the most remarkable transformation in the galaxy. The Tharnix Empire, which had conquered 43 worlds through overwhelming force, had voluntarily dissolved itself to join an alliance that offered something the Empire had never understood: security through cooperative defense rather than individual dominance. Emperor Vorak himself, now bearing the title of strategic advisor for former Imperial territories, had become one of humanity's most vocal advocates. His conversion was not the result of coercion. It was the natural response of a warrior culture that had finally encountered something stronger than itself. The Emperor requests a meeting, Admiral Slade reported. He wishes to discuss the implementation of Protocol 7 throughout former Imperial space. Protocol 7, the tactical doctrine that treated every ship as a potential weapon and every battle as an opportunity to transcend conventional limitations, had become the foundation of Alliance military thinking. Morgan made her way to the conference room where Emperor Vorak waited. The former conqueror had changed dramatically in the 5 years since his fleet's surrender. His scaled features bore new scars, not from battle, but from the stress of transforming an empire built on conquest into a civilization focused on cooperative defense. Strategic coordinator. Vorak greeted her. I come with a request that may seem paradoxical. Morgan settled into her chair and waited. In 5 years of working with the former emperor, she had learned that his requests usually involved concepts that challenged fundamental assumptions about how civilizations should function. My people, Vorak continued, wish to establish a memorial to human strategic innovation. We want to create a monument that will remind future generations of the species that taught the galaxy to survive through strength rather than conquest. The request was indeed paradoxical. The Tharnix wanted to build a monument to the people who had defeated their empire so thoroughly that they had voluntarily abandoned everything that defined their civilization. What form would this memorial take? Morgan asked. Vorak activated a holographic display that showed the design for a structure unlike anything in galactic architecture. The monument was a crystalline spire that rose from the surface of Tharnix Prime, its faceted sides reflecting light in patterns that told the story of humanity's integration into galactic civilization. We call it the Spire of Transformed Understanding, Vorak explained. It will serve as both memorial and academy teaching future generations about the species that redefined the very concept of strategic thinking. But the most remarkable aspect of the memorial was its inscription words that had been carved in the languages of every Alliance species. Here is remembered the species that learned to survive their own potential extinction and use that knowledge to ensure that no other species would ever need to face the same choice. The inscription would become legendary throughout the galaxy, quoted by military historians, philosophers, and political theorists for generations. Emperor, she said quietly, I want you to understand something about what we did. The tactical doctrines we developed, the weapons we created, the strategies we implemented, they were not innovations born from superiority or advanced thinking. They were the desperate responses of a species that understood extinction was always one mistake away. Vorak studied her with the respect that came from having witnessed human capabilities firsthand. Strategic coordinator, that is precisely why your species has become the galaxy's most valued defenders. You understand the true cost of failure in ways that no other species can comprehend. The conversation that followed would be recorded and studied by xenopsychologists for centuries. It revealed the fundamental difference between humanity and every other known species. Humans had developed their understanding of warfare through direct experience with existential threat, while other species had learned combat as an extension of territorial competition. We never wanted to be warriors, Morgan explained. We became warriors because our own planet taught us that civilizations which cannot defend themselves cease to exist. Every human child learns about nuclear warfare, not as ancient history, but as a reminder of how close we came to destroying ourselves. And that knowledge, Vorak replied, is what makes humanity the most effective protectors the galaxy has ever known. You understand that survival requires accepting costs that other species consider unthinkable. The memorial was completed 2 years later, becoming the most visited site in former Imperial space. But perhaps the most significant monument was the one that required no construction at all, the simple fact that no species in Alliance space had engaged in military conquest since humanity's integration into galactic civilization. As Morgan stood in the memorial chamber aboard Unity's Promise studying the names of humans who had died to protect worlds they had never seen, she received a communication that would define the next phase of human involvement in galactic affairs. Strategic Coordinators, correct. Admiral Slade reported, "We have received a transmission from the Outer Spiral. A species called the Cardini Union is requesting Alliance membership. They claim to be facing invasion from something called the Void Fleet, an extragalactic force that appears to be immune to conventional weapons." Morgan studied the intelligence reports that accompanied the transmission. The Void Fleet represented everything that humanity had prepared for, but hoped never to encounter an enemy that could not be negotiated with, could not be deterred, and possessed technology that transcended known scientific principles. "Admiral," she said, activating the ship's communication system. "Signal all Alliance fleets. Implement Protocol 10. Protocol 10 existed in the deepest archives of human tactical doctrine. It was the strategic response designed for enemies that threatened not just Alliance territory, but the existence of galactic civilization itself. As Alliance fleets throughout the galaxy received their orders and began preparing for a conflict that would test everything humanity had taught them about survival, Morgan made a personal entry in her strategic log. The galaxy is about to discover why humans developed the capacity to destroy themselves and then chose not to. Some threats are so severe that they require responses that transcend normal moral considerations. Today, we find out if our preparations were sufficient. The sci-fi stories that would emerge from the coming conflict would become the foundation of galactic literature for millennia. They would tell of a species that had learned to weaponize their own extinction, and then use that knowledge to ensure that life itself could continue to exist in a universe that seemed determined to destroy it. But those stories would begin with a single transmission sent from Unity's Promise to every Alliance world, every former Imperial territory, and every species that had ever questioned whether humanity deserved its role as galactic protector. This is Strategic Coordinator Morgan of the Alliance Defense Force. We have received reports of an extragalactic threat that may require responses beyond conventional military doctrine. To any species that objects to human tactical methods, you are welcome to withdraw from Alliance protection and face this threat independently. To those who choose to remain under Alliance defense, understand that we will do whatever is necessary to ensure your survival. The response was unanimous. Every species in Alliance space requested continued human protection, even knowing that such protection might require witnessing capabilities that would redefine their understanding of what survival could cost. The galaxy had learned to trust the species that understood extinction better than anyone else, and that trust was about to be tested by an enemy that made the Tharnix Empire look like a minor territorial dispute. Humanity's real test was just beginning. The galaxy has been transformed. The species once dismissed as primitive cargo haulers now stands as the ultimate protector of galactic civilization. But their greatest challenge awaits an extragalactic threat that will force humanity to reveal capabilities that will either save the galaxy or terrify it into questioning whether some prices are too high to pay for survival. If this story has shown you something about the power of underestimation and the dangerous beauty of human determination, share it with someone who needs to understand that strength often comes from the most unexpected sources. And if you want to explore more tales of humanity's place among the stars, subscribe for stories that will challenge everything you think you know about what it means to be human in a universe full of wonders and terrors beyond imagination.